Hello, welcome to the Ghosts of Harrenhal. My name's Simon.
And I'm Mackelly.
Thank you for joining us for episode 174 of our chapter-by-chapter book review of A Song of Ice and Fire by George Martin. Today we'll be discussing chapter 30 of A Storm of Swords. That's Jon 4.
Maybe I should have said, and I'm Mackelly, neighborino? What's the character?
It took me a second then. Ned Flanders.
Ned Flanders, yes. That's apparently I sound a bit like Ned Flanders sometimes when I say, and I'm Mackelly. Anyway, we're going to chat about the chapter and try not to spoil any future plot points for you, and hopefully we're going to provide you some entertainment along the way.
We'll summarise what happened, discuss our thoughts on it, provide some useful background, compare it to the television show, indulge in quite a lot of pedantry today, and cover some relevant news and listener correspondence. Be sure to check out the show notes, they'll provide some additional information about the characters and geography of this chapter. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. It's a long weekend for us. You and
it
me.
Is, yes.
So
thank you, Dr. King.
That. Yes, we're recording on a weekday, on a Monday, which is not something we would normally be doing at around midday on a weekday. So
no,
I'm enjoying that.
At least not if anyone in authority at our job listens
right.
to the podcast.
Well, yes, exactly. We would never do that. Yeah, I made a bit of a GOH blunder last night that I realized today, and I'm guessing quite a lot of people realized as well. And it's happened once before, and it was bound to happen again. So this morning, I usually check our overnight numbers first thing in the morning and see where we are in that point in the morning. So it was about 8:00, and I was looking, and I was like, wow, our numbers look really good. Now, our best day of the week is almost always Tuesday. And there's a reason for that.
The day after we publish, yeah.
Yes, that's the day our episode, our new episode goes
live,
live, is Tuesdays. So that is usually the busiest day. And I was like, wow, we are off to a rocking Monday start. And then I was like, oh, wait a second. Let me just go look at what's going on here. And so I, sure enough, I published this week's episode. I scheduled it to go live at midnight this morning instead of
that
Tuesday
is one of the
morning.
problems of the midnight thing.
Yes.
It can confuse you on the days. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh well. Hey,
so,
you know what that proves? It proves that they're hungry for us.
That's right. Yes. So
24 hours in advance, they're looking for it.
I went on the Discord server. And was like, so who's noticed that I published the episode today? Bonus, everyone gets to see what one of the perks of being a sustainer is like this week. Early episode for everyone. So,
yeah,
but,
no harm done.
I was at my mother-in-law's house, and I was watching football and just wasn't paying enough attention when I scheduled it.
Easily done. Done.
So how about you? How are you doing?
I'm fine. I've had some medical woes this week. I don't know if you know on the Sustainer videos, but they may have eagle-eyed people might have noticed that I've got a band-aid on my neck where a vampire sunk its teeth into me.
I did notice.
Yeah. I went to see the dermatologist. My dermatologist is Hispanic and she's very nice, but she does not mind making racially motivated comments about my skin. And she thinks I need to take a lot more care. And she proved it by biopsying my neck to see if there was something there.
All right.
I think it was just a pimple. We'll see.
She was just looking to biopsy something. She's like,
yeah, exactly. I'm going to cut something out of you to teach you a lesson. And every time you come back in here with a suntan, I'm going to cut more out of you.
I can totally relate. I've had so many things scraped and pulled and off of me, and yeah. And Stacy frequently makes comments about the paleness of my skin being the issue. So.
Yeah. The other funny thing that happened this week was I was talking to Lucas. So Lucas has had his driver's license for probably a year now, and he's done quite a lot of driving. Now, he has a job and he drives to the job, and it's not very far away, but he drives every time he goes there. And now he's got he goes to the local community college and he goes on campus now, so he drives there and back. So he's driving every day. And I was saying that he's when I passed my driving test, my father had a car and I was allowed to use it very, very occasionally. Usually when he wanted to have a drink. It was the primary times I got to use it. But then I moved to college And so I had a little window of driving the car very, very occasionally. And then I went to college and didn't drive for like 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, because
that
in the
statement
UK,
alone is fascinating.
Right. Well, but Lucas, since he passed his driving test, he drives every day. He just drives and drives and drives. I was like, you've got way more experience at this age of driving than I did.
Right.
Way more.
Yeah.
And when I was 19, I crashed my father's car. I came home from college, borrowed it, and wrecked it.
Right.
My fault. Nobody else's. Nobody was hurt particularly, but the car was pretty damaged. And I was saying to Lucas, it's good. It's good that you've got past that sort of like initial hump of like, being a sort of like, not a reckless driver, but, really inexperienced.
Right, a new, inexperienced driver, sure. Yeah.
Right. And he was like, oh, thanks, Dad. Yeah, I appreciate it. He said, yesterday I was in the drive-in. I don't know which drive-in he was in, but he was in the drive-in getting some food. And he said, I forgot which was the brake pedal and which was the gas pedal.
Oh, no. 50-50 chance there. I guess he picked right.
All of my reassuring myself had to be recalibrated in an instant.
Oh, well, I guess he picked right, or else you would have noticed.
I get the feeling he picked wrong, but quickly adjusted, is what I'm guessing.
Could have been, yeah. Just to clarify, in the U.S. at least, a drive-in is a place you go to watch a movie. Drive-through is the place.
Drive-through. Sorry, yeah. I never use those things. I don't use those things because I always make mistakes. I find communicating through the thing
box
very difficult.
Yeah, it's never the smoothest of transactions.
And the worst is when Carson and Lucas are in the car with me because they're both primed to snort laughing whenever I. Yeah.
I get flack for my drive-through etiquette as well. They're both like, oh, whichever family member's in the car always has some commentary about how I handle it.
That's exactly my experience too. Exactly mine. I've actually talked about reversing through the drive-through. So
right. Do you want to do it?
Carson has reached the point where she delivers a script to me. Like she says, this is what you're going to say. And then what happens is, I'm kind of talkative and friendly.
Right.
They'll say something which will just trigger something and I'll go off topic and then I'll be lost. I won't know how to get back. I remember I'd had a sequence of like bad drive-through experiences and I was kind of getting a bit annoyed about it. And we went to, I think it was a Starbucks, and Carson had said, right, you're getting this, this, and this, and this. Really drilled it into me.
Right.
And the voice came through the box and said, hi, my name's Simon. How can I help you? I said, your name's Simon?
10 minutes later, you still haven't ordered. Oh, that's good stuff. Yes, I get similar criticism. You might be shocked to learn that Stacy feels I'm a bit too loquacious at the drive-thru as well.
What? What a scurrilous charge.
Yes, she's like, pare it down. Only the essentials.
Carson does that to me. I'll answer a question and she'll say, so you mean yes? Well, anyway, let's get down to business. How did we leave Jon Snow?
How did we?
Last we saw of Jon, he and Yigrette were thoroughly breaking his vows over and over and over again. He told Ghost that they had to go their separate ways for a time, but they'd meet up again at Castle Black. He'd hoped that Ghost showing up without Jon would serve as a warning to his brothers to be vigilant. Mackelly, why don't we give the summary of this one?
All right. Well, Jon, Yigrette, and the rest of the wildling raiders stand at the base of the wall. Ghost is nowhere to be seen. Jon hopes that means Ghost picked up what he put down and is now racing for Castle Black as a warning for the brothers of all that's happened with the great ranging thus far.
Styr has sent men with warhorns riding east and west to scout for crows on patrol. Jon hopes to hear the horns, indicating that his brothers have arrived to stop this invasion, but so far the horns remain silent. Jarl will be leading a band of 12 men, all young, on a climb to the top of the wall. Can I just mention one more time that the whole horn thing is really fraught at this point? Because So, if the wildlings blow their horn because they've seen the Night's Watch, the Night's Watch are going to blow their horn twice to say they've seen the wildlings, and suddenly everyone thinks the White Walkers are coming.
It's true. Panic, pandemonium.
Never mind those wildlings.
Did you hear the second horn blast? Oh, well, Jarl has chosen a location where, although the wall itself is actually about 800 feet high, due to the rough terrain, a third of the height is earth and stone instead of ice. The forest has made it all the way to the wall, as the shortage of Black Brothers hasn't allowed them to properly keep the trees at bay.
Jon ponders his future. If he stays with Yigrette, he'll need to commit to the wildling life, heart and soul. However, if he abandons the wildlings and returns to the Night's Watch, it would likely mean a death sentence for Yigrette. Even if he took her with him, he couldn't go back to Castle Black, which means he'll be a Night's Watch deserter, and her a wildling from north of the wall. Not a welcome duo anywhere in the Seven Kingdoms.
Returning his attention to the present, Jon notices that the wall scares the Thenns, including Styr. However, Jarl and his men aren't fazed. After a speech by Jarl, where he announces the rewards offered by Mance for the first group to reach the top, true castle-forged steel swords for all, and their names in a song Mance will write about this expedition, the men start their ascent.
They climb in 3 groups of 4. Jarl and his men are 300 feet up the wall when they finally touch the ice. Jarl's group has the best terrain for climbing and take an early lead. Styr feels they're moving too slowly, but Jon knows better. He's aware of the difficulties the climbers are facing. Aside from the exhaustion of the vertical climb, there's also melting ice, cracks and crevices, winds, and smooth vertical stretches, all bringing their own challenges.
Jarl almost falls to his death when the ice he's climbing gives way. He falls, but the stake attached to his rope holds, and he jerks to a stop. However, 6 hours into the climb, true disaster strikes. Jarl's group is making good progress, having taken a lead over the others again after the previous mishap, when a huge section of ice, 50 feet square, breaks off, and all 4 in Jarl's group fall with nothing to catch them, except for the ground.
Kelly, just a terminology question for you. I know that we don't normally interject here, but when you read 50-foot square, do you read 50 feet by 50 feet, or do you read 5 feet by 10 feet?
I would think it would be 5 feet by 10 feet, technically, but I think it's meant 50 feet by 50 feet.
Yeah, I think it's 50 feet by 50 feet. I think that's what that means, but it's just, It is slightly ambiguous terminology.
You're right,
I feel.
It is, yeah.
The day is nearing its end when the first group summits the wall. The climbers drop down rope and those on the ground attach hemp ladders to it that the men pull back up. Eventually there are 5 ladders spanning the height of the wall. It's near midnight when Jon and Yigrette finally reach the top. Yigrette, in tears, says she almost fell a few times. Jon tries to console her, saying that the worst is over, but that's not what brought on the tears. It's that they never found the Horn of Winter. They dug up all those graves, freeing all those shades, and still can't bring this wall down. So, you know what? I wasn't really looking forward to this chapter because I recalled the basics of it. That there's a terrifying climb for the characters we didn't really care about.
Right. Yes.
Jon and Yigrette are just at the bottom. I mean, I'd forgotten that there was danger to Jon and Yigrette of falling wildlings, but...
Yes.
But then our heroes actually just walk up a ladder. I mean, it's kind of strenuous, but hardly worthy of a chapter,
Right. My first thought of hearing you say that is, I'm surprised that you remember specifics about this chapter.
Well, I remembered that they didn't climb it.
Oh, okay.
That's what I remembered. I remembered that they were not,
scaling
mountain climbing. Yeah.
Yes.
That there's something. I thought it was a rope. I didn't remember the ladder. I thought a rope was thrown down to them. But I will say though, having read it, again and reread it and taken notes on it and what have you, that George Martin did an excellent job on sort of describing how difficult it would be, capturing all the difficulties, the height, the cold, the slickness, the danger of a crumble. That being said, I did read quite a few critiques of it. I mean, the critiques are all about the possibility of the wall.
Okay, sure.
How basically, if this is mostly ice, the bottom section is under so much pressure it would just melt out of there. So you
right.
just wouldn't.
Oh.
It's just not a feasible structure,
Okay.
So.
Well, my thought was, it would have been a lot more likely. Jon is kind of hoping a patrol comes by and stops this invasion here, and it sure would have been a lot more likely for the patrol to pass by if 300 rangers weren't off on an excursion.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Especially when there's issues like the forest having grown all the way up to the wall and making it 300 feet before you even touch ice.
But I will say, what Yigrette says right at the end of this chapter does actually give Mormont a justification. Because if Mance really had found something that could bring the wall down, then they did need to nip that in the bud. You couldn't defend the wall. You have to go and stop it. How the heck he knew that's what they were doing?
Well, and that's where the issue is. How did they determine what they were looking for? How did the Night's Watch determine what the wildlings were looking for? By sending 3 groups of 5 into the Frostfangs, while the other 300 men sat around on the Fist of the First Men. They still could have accomplished that, keeping the majority of the force south of the wall.
Question for you, and this will be a test of even your memory, but I think I know the answer. When they left the wall to head north, did they know where they were going, or did they get the information from Craster?
Second option.
Second option.
Yes.
So, because what I was going to say was, if they were headed to the Frostfangs, because that's where they thought the wildlings were, because they gathered that intel somehow, then it would have been possible that Maester Aemon had read something in his library that said, be careful if the wildlings gather in the Frostfangs, because there is a legend of a horn that can bring down the wall buried in the Frostfangs,
Right.
I'm thinking Craster's library, not so deep.
No, probably not so fleshed out with such useful knowledge. Yeah. No, they were wandering around going village by village. They were all empty, remember? And then they stopped at Craster's, and he's like, oh, well, this is why it's empty, because they've all gone to the Frostfangs.
Could Mormont have... but you see, there's no point going unless you have the suspicion,
Right. And Mormont's excuse for going, back, when he announced it, was he wants to find out what they're up to and what happened to Benjen and all the other rangers that have gone missing, like Waymore Royce and such.
Okay, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt here. Maester Aemon reads something about a legend of a horn that could knock the wall down.
Right.
And he talks to Mormont about it and says, you know what? I'm worried about this, I mean, usually they're not organised enough to sort of find this thing, but maybe with Mance in charge they have. Maybe Mance had access to the library and read the same thing.
Could be. Yeah, as you're saying that, I was just thinking that when Yigrette says, we didn't find the Horn of Winter, we dug up all those graves and found nothing, Jon might have gone, you know what? I did a little digging and found a horn under the ground. Would that be useful information to you at all?
Well done, Jon, for not saying that.
Right, Jon kept that poker face intact.
Not one of his strengths, normally.
No, definitely not. So we lose Jarl in this chapter.
Right, and Jarl and Styr get mixed up in my mind, but Jarl is the one who's climbed the wall many times. Styr is the Magnar of then.
Yes.
So
Jarl was Val's pet, as Mance put it, which he took offense to.
Right. So it was always an interesting dichotomy because Jarl clearly had the experience to get over the wall, but was younger and less generally experienced. But Styr is much more of an authority figure, it seems, in this, and so it'll be interesting to see how they go from this point forward, because now they're over the wall, he didn't really need Jarl anymore, and it'll actually lighten his burden, Styr, because now he can just be the boss of this,
Right, and we learned last chapter, Styr wasn't exactly liking this dual leadership situation. He was behaving as if he was the only one in charge. And so that led me to wonder, how will Styr lead on the south side of the wall? Because, Jon tells us that experienced raiders know not to steal the first horses they come across because it raises the alarm too quickly. And I wonder if Styr would think to wait. Now, he's got other rangers. There was like 20 rangers, raiders in Jarl's party, and they lost, 4? So they've still got raiders left.
But none of them are on equal footing with Styr.
Exactly.
To stop him from doing what he wants to do. It's interesting. He really needed Jarl to steer him.
Maybe Jarl said, now listen, I'm about to go on a really dangerous climb right here. If something goes wrong, here's a list of things you need to do and not do.
Meanwhile, Styr is firing arrows into the ice just above him, trying to knock it down.
Right. Yeah, so that's the question is, will Styr trust his raiders to guide him, or will he, he's, as the Magnar of Fen, he's used to godlike authority and respect and accustomed. So is he accustomed to letting others guide him, or will he be like, no, we're taking these horses, even though the rangers are like, no, this is a bad idea.
Yep, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So Jon's conflicted, of course. I mean, Jon's always going to be conflicted in, while he's with Yigrette, he's always going to be conflicted. Because his entire life with Yigrette, if he lives to a ripe old age with Yigrette, he's going to be conflicted because he has made a vow to not be with her. So, but now he's definitely fallen in love with her.
Yeah. You know what? Speaking of him having conflict like this, I just thought of. So they make it over the wall now, right? And Styr is now in charge.
They've certainly done the hard part.
Right, yes.
Let's say they finish.
They finish the easier part and get back down to the southern side of the ground. Jon knows not to take the first horses you see. Jon. So does Jon let Styr make rookie mistakes and open the possibility of them being intercepted and Jon being captured or killed as a traitor?
I think Jon can safely wash his hands of that one. He can say to himself, if Styr isn't listening to those experienced raiders telling him that, why would he listen to a dubiously betraying member of the Night's Watch?
No, you don't want these horses. There's better ones down the road. Trust me.
You should walk blowing a fanfare as you go.
Right.
Sing the "We're the Wildlings and we're on the other side of the wall" song.
Yeah. Of course, then it's also, is there anyone left at Castle Black or the Shadow Tower to do anything, even if they did take the first horses that they come across, Enough of a force. This is 116. No, they lost 2 more. Like 114-ish strong force. So, You know what?
It's just occurred to me as we're talking about this, because we were talking about them getting back down the other side of the wall. It's actually quite tricky. I mean, it's pretty much as tricky to get down the other side of the wall, unless they go to where there is a set of stairs down at one of the neighbouring castles, presumably.
Right. That is a good point that you bring up there.
Of course, they do have the ladder. They could bring the ladder back over and flip it over to the other side of the wall.
Yes.
But then that makes another point to me is, why don't they leave these ladders in place? Why don't they leave, at certain strategic points of the wall, why wouldn't Jarl leave a thread
right
at the top of the wall? Just put a pile of snow over the ladder and leave a thread running down to the bottom of the wall, and you pull on that thread.
I got it.
And a ladder unrolls.
Yeah, right. That's a clever idea.
Uh-huh.
Mance should have thought of this by now.
Yeah, well, I mean, exactly. It's not like this is the first time the wildlings, apart from the Thens, have encountered the wall.
Right. Yeah. I like the idea. Anyway, you had started going down the discussing the topic of Jon and Yigrette and Jon's conflict.
Oh,
you were on a good roll there. Sorry for derailing it.
No. Yeah, I mean, he wants the wildlings to be caught here on the wall by by Night's Watch raiding party, but that's not likely, like you said. There's not enough left to do that. But now that, from the top of the wall while they were climbing, it would have been easy as pie to get rid of them. All you have to do is throw some hot water down.
Right.
It would just melt them. They'd just be gone in no time.
Like a little slide created.
Right. So,
but your thought about Yigrette and Jon and Jon's dilemma here is a good point. He's in a tough spot, and
and he always will be. There's no way out of this tough spot.
Right.
The only thing that could get him out of this tough spot is Yigrette dying, basically.
Right. Sure. Yeah, that would remove this dilemma he has. But if you think about it, it's a far cry from where his mind was just at the beginning of last chapter. He was still, playing the spy and thinking of how best to serve the Night's Watch and feeling really incredibly guilty over breaking his oath. And yet in this chapter, he seems much more open to the possibility of leaving the Night's Watch for the love he has for Yigrette.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, absent the presence of the White Walkers, staying with her north of the Wall is probably the most viable option. Because he can't bring her to the Night's Watch. They don't allow that kind of thing,
Yes.
And if he leaves the Night's Watch south of the Wall, then he's hunted for the rest of his life,
Yeah, but he thinks about those exact things, and his thought is, if I stay with Yigrette and become a wildling, he has to do it heart and soul. He has to fully buy into it, and he's not sure if he's capable of that. But I thought of another option that he hadn't mentioned was, what about possibly fleeing to Essos?
Yeah.
They'd both be just people in Essos.
Right. That's true.
Or
I'm not sure how carefully people stalk Night's Watch. What's the word I'm looking for? Not betrayers.
Deserters.
Deserters, yes.
Yes.
I'm not sure how carefully people, how much effort is put into chasing down Night's Watch deserters. Certainly Essos feels like it's far enough.
Right. I don't know that they'd go all the way to Essos. And actually, I was thinking, if Jon knew the extent of the chaos in the north right now, he might be more tempted to flee with Yigrette, because I doubt there's many northern lords that would be hunting him at the moment. Even if the Castle Black set up an alarm that said we're missing a brother of the Night's Watch is on the loose. But I don't even think his Night's Watch brothers have the bandwidth to be tracking him down right now. And in fact, nobody knows where he is. It's likely most people assume assume he died in the Frostfangs with
exactly. If he wanted to flee, now's the time, because he's AWOL.
Hey, it's a golden opportunity to slip away if he cares to do so, because it's likely everyone assumes he's dead. Yeah.
Of course, what you said about the chaos in the north is the one thing that might act as an anchor to him, because he wouldn't abandon Westeros while that was going on.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. That's possible. Yeah. And then, of course, the third option is abandoning the wildlings for the Night's Watch, but he thinks that will almost certainly lead to Ygrette's death, and then he'd have guilt about that would live with him the rest of his life.
Yeah. And the loss of it, not just the guilt of it, but the loss of it. I mean, he's in love with her.
Right. That's true.
Losing her accidentally would haunt him for the rest of his life. But losing her because he betrayed her would, that's a whole new level of haunting.
Right. So he's put himself in quite the tough spot by going and falling in love with Yigrette.
Yeah.
But, your heart will go where your heart will go. So
True.
But Jon, despite not being trained by Syrio Forel, astutely observes that the Thenns, including the Magnar, Styr, is scared of the wall.
Yes. It's an interesting observation, because, of course, when Jon and Tyrion arrived at the wall, they too were sort of like scared of it. It was like, oh my god, look at that thing. It's the end of the world. And of course it is the end of the world for the wildlings too, just in the opposite direction. Everything and are familiar with is this side of the wall, whichever side you're on.
Right, and that's the fact that you brought up Tyrion and Jon when they arrived at the wall. I can recall Tyrion standing on the top of the wall with Jon, looking out and thinking, you can imagine there being scary things out there on the other side of this wall,
right.
looking out at the haunted forest. So, yeah, absolutely. And it's such an immense presence, the wall, that it's just generally seeing it would be a rather shocking thing to behold, I guess.
Yep. So the force that scales the wall are all very young, which I think you'd have to be. I mean, this is, I was reading about the feasibility of climbing a ice face. I mean, people do climb ice walls, but it's very, very difficult, and it's 700 feet is absolutely bonkers, especially pure vertical. Just
right.
It doesn't really exist, and if it did, it would be extremely difficult.
Yeah. Yes. So you're right. From the dexterity and strength aspect, it would help to be young as well. I was thinking about it as it's suggesting not a lot of raiders live to an old age.
Not a lot of climbers, perhaps.
That's what I meant to say. Yeah, a lot of the climbers. Yeah,
but I mean, I think the raiders have to climb the wall,
right?
Because they're raiding. So
I was thinking maybe Martin put that in there as a sign of how dangerous this climb is, and then of course, if you make it over the wall, now you're in enemy territory, and you're on foot. Which,
yes. You better not steal a horse.
Right. Especially not early on. So again, it would help to be young and, have good cardio, I guess, would help as well.
You've got to imagine that they're going to have to sleep. I mean, like, climbing down the other side of that wall after they've spent, 8-9 hours climbing up it, and then hauling a 700-foot ladder up the face of the thing.
Right.
They must be absolutely spent.
That's a good point. Because they started in the morning, and it was after midnight when Jon and Yigrette finally got up there, and all they were doing was climbing a ladder.
Yeah.
Which,
yeah, I bet Jon and Yigrette were probably tired at the end of that.
That's what I was
going to say. Nasty climb, yeah.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. At least 500 feet because of the slope. They might have been able to walk up 200 to 300 of it, but at least 500-foot vertical climb on a ladder your arms would be so tired.
I'm all over my idea of hiding ladders up there, though.
Yeah, I'd like it.
I think this would work, because the thing is they'd get covered in snow, and we know that the wall is not being. I mean, I think the top of the wall they try to gravel it and they walk along it to try to, so they might spot that if it was being routinely maintained, but
right.
We know that it's not, so there's an opportunity here for the wildlings to create a whole spate of these things that could be pulled down at will.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's 300 miles. You'd think there's some strategic places you could stash a rope ladder.
It's also, because I watched the TV show for this, I'm also slightly influenced by that. The point where they climbed, at the top of the wall, the set was well done because there was like an old abandoned sort of ballista of some sort, sort of like a catapult or something, some machinery which clearly was abandoned but was there. It was drifted, covered in snow. The idea that you couldn't hide a bundled ladder is fanciful. I mean, they're clearly not clearing the wall enough.
Yeah, good point. I like it. So Jarl gives kind of a rah-rah speech to his climbers before they start their ascent, and he mentions that Mance has promised a sword to the members of the first of the 3 groups that reach the top of the wall, as well as a song that Mance is going to write about this expedition, and their names will be mentioned in the song. And Jarl kind of goes on to how it'll be a good sword. It'll be Southern Castle Forged steel. And it just goes to show you that, I mean, this is quite an achievement that they're preparing to take on. And their huge reward for it is you get a sword.
Yeah.
And it kind of just gives you an idea of how behind the wildlings are regarding raw materials and the knowledge, skill, and resources to make iron weapons.
Well, that's true. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
And it made me think that, something that Jon had made for Arya, little 8-year-old Arya, I think she was around 8 at the time, before they left as a parting gift, is something that these men are willing to risk their lives and pure exhaustion climbing this wall for. It's so taken for granted south of the wall. I mean, a sword is a sword. Armories in all the castles probably have thousands of swords.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a different world for sure. There's no doubt about it. But the nice thing about raiding south of it, you can start to plunder these things and sort of, but they'll always be on the rare side, and so that's why they're, treated as holy objects and gifts for great acts.
Yeah, plus it's got to be really challenging to get goods like a bunch of swords back up over the wall again,
Yeah. You'd be tempted to steal a horse at that point.
Right.
So Styr watches them climb and he complains bitterly that they're going too slow. And I kind of understand. I mean, A, you're not doing it. And B, they're probably moving at what seems like a snail's pace. It takes, as you said, the whole day to climb this wall. So that's, it would be extremely boring to watch. And you would feel like they should be making better progress. But I think on some levels you've got to know that that's terribly unfair to watch from the ground.
So Styr's complaining about it, and Jon holds his tongue, and he's thinking of the difficulties that he had when he and Stone Snake climbed the mountain the night that he caught Yigrette and killed Oral. And he's thinking that was a mountain. This is ice, and he's kind of weighing the additional challenges to climbing a sheer ice wall. And that I was thinking, isn't it great when management complains about things that they have no clue about the intricacies of?
I see, Mackelly. I see what you're saying now. Make this personal, huh?
Well, it's just he's like, they're doing this too slow, as if he has any idea how difficult this is.
Yeah.
That made me laugh a little.
It's always much easier to lead, delegate and then complain.
Right, yes. Especially when your boots are on the ground and their boots are on an ice wall 600 feet in the air.
So the catastrophic failure of the face of the ice, it immediately points to the reason they split into 3 groups 20 yards apart. They only needed one group to reach the top because they were going to haul the ladders up, so they had redundancy. But pretty awful for the ones who fell.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And, so Jon is kind of laying the climb out for us as he's watching it. And he mentions that I think it's like 10 feet after Jarl leaves the tallest tree and is now officially on the ice wall. Like 10 feet up, he hammers an iron spike into the ice. And I get that one. That's kind of your first one. You want to make sure that one's pretty... Yes. But I was thinking, they use the iron stakes until they run out. And then they start using horn and sharpened bone for stakes afterward. I think he mentions about 4 hours into the climb at that point. And I thought, might it not be wiser to use those more difficult stakes first when your arms are less tired, and then switch to the iron stakes as you get fatigued, because it's easier to drive those in?
Yeah, so. You are absolutely right. I wonder if they were sort of mixing them as they went. I wonder if it was a matter of, this looks like a point where I need an iron spike.
That could be, yeah. He didn't describe it that way, but the way he described it, that could have, because he said the last iron stake ran out about 4 hours in. But that doesn't mean that they were only using iron stakes to that point.
Because I agree. I think it would be foolhardy to just use the iron stakes on the lower parts of the wall and then use the bone on the higher parts when you're tired. It seems like the wrong way to go.
And you get like 650 feet up and you're like, okay, we've got a straw. All we've got left is this straw. The wall
is said to defend itself, and it did here by throwing off one of the groups. Actually, just one of the groups, right? 2 groups made it to the top, yeah?
Yes, just one of the groups. But 2 Thens fell as well on their way up the ladders.
That's right, yeah.
So,
yeah.
And Yigrette almost fell a few times.
In the TV show, there were 4 groups going up, and 3 of them get taken out by the ice slide.
Okay.
Only 1 group makes it.
That was my teaser last week for this week's episode, is that the wall defends itself.
The wall defends itself, I remembered.
Yeah. Speaking of something you said earlier about the realities of a 700-foot wall, ties into something I was thinking about this whole chapter. He describes the wall having fissures and chimneys and cracks and crevices, from various times of icing and freezing and icing and freezing. And I wondered if we've just come to the end of a 10-year summer. I wonder what kind of toll that 10-year summer would have taken on this wall. I know it's way colder where the wall is than the rest of the 7 kingdoms, but surely it had to have had a fairly significant impact on the stability of the wall. I'm sure 700 feet of ice takes a really long time to melt, but we've seen huge glaciers melt to near nothing due to, increase in temperature.
Yeah, it is north facing. This is the north face. It's the colder face. It won't weep as much as the south face would. Sure. So, but the one thing is actually the melting, the fissures and chimneys would make the climb a little bit easier because you get into those and use those a little bit.
And I think that's one of the issues. Eric, the third group, was Jarl, Grig the goat, and then Eric was leading the third group. And Jon mentioned that they had the slickest, smoothest surface, and they were actually making for a chimney to try and make it easier when Jarl fell. So, yeah, I just wonder, everybody loves the 10-year summer that they've just had, and they want, eternal summer. But eventually, eternal summer might lead to a significant reduction in the stability of the wall.
If eternal summer were to melt the wall, then eternal winter will follow.
Right, at least one really big flood.
Yeah. So Jon's climb up the wall is relatively unremarkable and eventful, and we get the idea now how the wildlings plan to get their 100,000 or whatever it is over the wall, because you don't need to be a skilled climber, you just need to climb a ladder.
Right, yeah, it's a useful trick.
Which the Thens apparently can't do.
But it's a useful trick, but not as useful as your trick.
I'm just saying. My trick is just having more ladders in place,
Right. Yes, exactly. Which, makes the climb a lot easier. Yeah. But, you're right. It's a pretty unusual chapter where the wall is the more active participant than Jon, kind of, Jon is pretty much just a passive onlooker to the action. And I was thinking about other chapters that were similar in concept to this, and maybe Sansa during the Battle of the Blackwater, where she was just sitting there listening to reports come in, and didn't have any actual action that she was taking. So I don't know, that it's unusual where our POV character is pretty much just watching what's happening. Yeah.
So Yigrette gets to the top and she's in tears, as I would be too. But when Jon tries to comfort her, she says it's not because of this fool. It's because the wildlings need to get over this wall, and the way to do it is by knocking the wall down with the Horn of Winter, or the Horn of Joramun, as we've also heard it described, right? They dug up 50 graves in the Frostfangs without any luck in finding this. So the plan was what we feared, but apparently unsuccessful. Although would Yigrette know? Maybe it has been found and Mance just didn't tell everyone.
True, that's true. We had discussed that before. Maybe he kept it to just his core officers,
Yeah.
But yeah, so they didn't. Jon did get a bit of info that he'd been wanting, that he'd been sent out to find.
This is the key thing. Finally, he's got some intelligence to report back.
Yes, so he finally has something useful to come out of this. But then, so she mentions how much she hates the wall and how cold it is. And Jon said, well, yeah, it's made of ice. And she said, no, it's made of blood. And, she probably likely means it's made from blood because of all the wildlings that have died trying to, scale it back and forth or just trying to attack it. But, we were having a somewhat similar conversation on the Discord community about the similarities between the wall and the Iron Throne, because they're both known to defend themselves. It's often said that kings cut themselves, hurt themselves, even be killed by the Iron Throne. And we were discussing the possibility of if blood magic or some kind of magic was used in the construction of the Iron Throne, as it's believed that magic was used in the construction of the wall here. And, so I'm wondering when she says it's made of blood, if she might possibly be referencing blood magic.
Well, certainly mechanical engineers, structural engineers will tell you that it's not staying up without magic. So that's possibly George Martin not knowing, perfectly reasonable. But also, the nice thing about having a magical realm is you can always say, well, it was magic, It
was magic, yes. Yeah. And remember, walls like the walls of Storm's End are supposed to have magical spells built into them that protect it from invaders. That's why Davos had to row Melisandre underneath and inside the outer walls before she could birth her shadow child. And
was Bran the Builder involved in Storm's End?
That is thought as well. So it seems to be a feature of structures that are supposedly built by Bran the Builder. So
Bran the Builder was dabbling in the dark arts.
I guess so.
Yigrette expresses some concern about freeing the shades from the graves in the Frostfangs. I mean, it's, grave robbing is never a pleasant thought. Jon did see holes dug in the ground in the wildling camp, possibly didn't put it together at the time.
Right. Yes, when he was Ghost, when he was war against.
As Ghost, he saw it,
yeah.
So there's a wild theory around this.
So, I saw a theory online that said that wondered, could there be an unexpected cause and effect situation here? So what Yigrette says she's worried about freeing all these shades. Might Mance's efforts in digging up the graves and freeing the shades and the Frostfangs have been what woke the others and caused them to start to stir again?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, but I think there's a cause and effect problem here, because Mance was only digging the graves because he was afraid of the White Walkers. So I don't see how he's triggering the White Walkers by digging for them. Otherwise, he wouldn't be afraid of them.
Right. So the reason he wants to get to the southern side of the wall is because of the reemergence of the White Walkers. So he went looking for the Horn of Joramun, where he dug up graves.
Right. So just logically, it doesn't make sense, but sort of narratively, it's very interesting to consider that might be possible. But it
doesn't necessarily
doesn't pass the sniff test for me.
Yeah. It mentions in A World of Ice and Fire that dark gods are worshipped beneath the Frostfangs. So maybe that has something to do with the shades that Yigrette is worried about having freed. And I didn't want to put this in pedantry, but it was just something that crossed my mind. It's a good job.
It's like 4 pages long.
It's just that, so there was 120 strong force here, and they just left all their horses and stuff behind on the northern side of the wall. That seems like a significant loss of horses. Like, you'd think maybe you would have brought 130, 140 people
to take the horses back to the main force.
Because we've discussed the wildlings don't have a ton of resources here. And I don't know if everybody had a horse, but they couldn't have gotten as far as they got to if hardly anybody had a horse. Right.
So no, that's a good point, Mackelly. In fact, are we sure that everybody climbed the wall? Did it say that? Or could that have happened and just not been worthy of comment? That a small group was left with the resources?
That's possible. It's possible. Yeah. I believe there was some mention of 120, but I don't remember whether it was them all reaching the top. We know not all of them reached the top, but yeah, that's possible. That's why I didn't want to put it in pedantry.
Good pseudo pedantry, anyway.
Right.
How about some background?
Okay, background. Well, it's finally happened. We had discussed that it was going to happen at some point.
You ran out of background?
This chapter was only a few pages long, and there really wasn't anything I could sink my teeth into to discuss for background. So, I had been holding this one particular topic in my back pocket for something just like this. And so I have finally...
You're banging in the last iron cleat.
Yes.
You're only halfway up the wall, but the last iron cleat is going in.
Right. We're probably not even halfway up the wall yet. So I am going to give you some background information. It's just not necessarily background information from a world of ice, the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. Okay, so here's what I've got for you this week.
I've read it. I feel like some of this is for my benefit, but I know what you're going to say. It's perfectly reasonable background. Right. Carry on.
Well, we all know that George Martin gets his inspiration for much of the storylines, characters, civilizations, and geographical elements and such in A Song of Ice and Fire from real-life things. In fact, just 2 episodes ago, we talked about how Martin got the idea for Casterly Rock from the Rock of Gibraltar. Well, you may or may not know that the wall also has a real-life counterpart. No, the real-life version isn't 300 miles long, nor is it 700 plus feet high. The wall is actually based on Hadrian's Wall in northern England.
Point of order, Hadrian.
Hadrian. Okay, I wondered whether you'd know how to pronounce that correctly. So, Hadrian's Wall was built in 122 AD, and the wall spans the length of the island from conveniently named Wall's End on the eastern side to Bowness on Solway. Did I say that right? Bowness?
Bonus,
okay. Bowness on Solway on the western side, which is a distance of roughly 73 miles. The Horn of Winter wouldn't have been as needed for Hadrian's Wall, because, like I said, rather than being 700 feet tall, Hadrian's Wall stood roughly 8 feet tall, which was reduced from the 10 feet originally planned once construction was underway. You know how construction goes.
Yeah.
Not as many rocks as you thought you had, I guess.
Right.
The Roman Emperor Hadrian had it built, but there was some debate regarding the reasons. The primary reason...
I found that sentence fascinating. It's like, to me, the reasons are obvious.
Yeah, well, the primary reason that everyone tends to agree on is that it was to separate the barbarians from the Romans. Although,
yes, for barbarians, read Scottish people.
Well, I'm just talking about from the Romans' perspective here. Although some theorize it was also a propaganda statement as well as a tax station, because anyone coming in and out with goods had to pay up at the wall. Right. So it was much harder to sneak across. But much like the Night's Watch wall, Hadrian's also had way stations for soldiers tasked with manning the wall. There were 14 forts along the wall, spaced about 7 1/3 miles apart, which seems fairly specific. But then in between those were mile castles, which were smaller forts, every Roman mile, which I think is slightly smaller than a current-day mile, I believe.
Okay.
But anyway, we'll go with that. Every Roman mile. And then a watchtower every 1/3 mile. And a hotly debated topic by scholars is whether there was a walkway on top of Hadrian's Wall, as Martin has on his wall. It's debatable, I guess. And also, just like the Brothers of the Night's Watch, the Roman soldiers assigned to the wall also took an oath not to marry. However, the oath wasn't quite as permanent as taking the black. The Roman soldiers only had to serve a mere 25 years before being granted citizenship in the Roman Empire. Soldiers also came from all over, much like with the Night's Watch. Whenever Rome would win a war and conquer a land, many of the fighting men from those lands would be recruited into the Roman army, and plenty would end up walking the wall. And I'm no expert on Hadrian's Wall, obviously. I read a few articles and a Wikipedia page on it, but as I understand it, it was staffed for about 300 years.
It's interesting. I've been there. I've seen it.
Okay, I wondered about that. Yeah.
It totally exists. And also, funny enough, I was talking about Hadrian just a few months ago because in Athens there is a gate called Hadrian's Gate, and I commented to my friend Alex, who was with us. I said, Hadrian has got two famous pieces of archaeology named after him 2,000 miles apart.
Right. The wall.
He has a
and the
gate in Athens and a wall in Scotland. It's like the Roman Empire really was quite vast in Hadrian's time.
Yeah. So that's the best background I got for you this week.
Yeah, I think. I mean, what do I know? But I think they did walk on top of the wall, because if it's 8 feet high and you're patrolling it, I mean, you can't see anything.
Right. You just poke your head up over.
Exactly.
Prop your feet up on two rocks and peek your head up over.
It was certainly broad enough, but I mean, I guess the argument is it might have been rounded on the top. But I mean,
right? Sure. Yeah. But you've seen it, not me, so you'd have a better idea than I would.
It's interesting how manned it was. If you the spacing is way tighter than the spacing of the castles along the wall. Wall.
Right. Yeah. The
Because
Night's Watch wall. Right.
The wall, it's easy for to find a gap between the castles and try and climb there.
Right. Yeah.
There's
it covers significantly more territory.
But not that, I mean it's an order of magnitude more, but then I don't know. If you could have a watchtower every 1/3 of a mile for 73 miles, was it 73 miles you said?
Yeah.
So that's 200 watchtowers. If you put 200 watchtowers along the wall, they would only be 1.5 miles apart. Right. And you could, but from those points, you could see everything. There'd be no gaps if those 200 were manned. There would be no gaps.
Yeah, and I guess you don't need to have the concentration of soldiers in like we have here, where there's 3 castles with hundreds of people at each castle. Because, like we discussed earlier, 4 people would be enough to kick some rocks down on the people climbing the wall,
Right. And I mean, and you don't have to live there. I mean, if it's a watchtower and it's 8 miles from the nearest castle, well, you march there in the morning, you sit there all day, and you march home in the evening. It's not the end of the world.
That's something one of the articles or the Wikipedia page, I can't remember, mentioned is that, soldiers lived at the primary forts, and then they would shuttle people out east and west to man the smaller places.
They were 7 miles apart, right? So that's 3.5 mile walk, the longest walk you could have in the morning,
Right.
That's less than an hour.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a fort, you could rotate people in and out every couple days or whatever. Yeah. So
anyway, comparison with the television show. As I mentioned, this certainly happened. It's preceded by a scene with Yigrette and Jon, in which Yigrette tells Jon that she knows that he has not betrayed the Night's Watch. It's an interesting scene. And actually, it made a lot of sense, because she's saying, I know you now, and I know you wouldn't betray the Night's Watch. There's no way.
Wow, yeah. I don't recall that, but that's
I didn't recall it either. It was kind of a shock to me when she said it. And Jon, of course, looks like a deer in headlights. But she doesn't press him on it. She doesn't sort of like try to extort anything from him, apart from a promise to put her first. She says, Mance doesn't care about me. The Night's Watch don't care about you. We're just foot soldiers to them. We care about each other. Okay. And so we're going to put each other first.
I like that.
He makes that promise, but we all know what that's worth,
You said a few things in front of some weirwood trees, too.
Yeah. He's Ned Stark's son, but it's bastard son. Who knows what the other half of that was? So all the wildlings climb at the same time. They don't have the clever ladder thing. And the face collapse takes care of all but 4 of them. So there's only 12. There's only 16 in total, and 12 of them fall and die when the ice collapses. So only 4 survive. The 4 survivors are Tormund, Auril, Jon, and Yigrette. when the ice collapses, only Tormund and Auril are still on the ice. Jon and Yigrette are dangling from the rope, and Auril feels like he's being pulled, and so he severs the rope. But just before he severs it, Jon is able to swing back and forth and able to get his ice pick in just as the severing happens. So he's then got an ice pick. Yigrette swings down below it and he hangs on for dear life and she jerks at the bottom and he then pulls her back up. And they get intense. To the top and shoot Auril daggers for what he did.
Yeah, I bet.
but to be fair to Auril, I mean, actually, that is the plot of one of my all-time favourite movies, which is called Touching the Void, which is the story of an ill-fated mountaineering expedition to South America.
Okay.
But basically, it comes down to that hinge point of you're roped together, they're dangling in free space, and you are being pulled towards the end.
Yes.
What do you do?
Oh, yeah. That's a tough
Auril had no qualms. He was like,
but we're fine. We've got our feet in the things.
Auril, of course, is dead in the books because he's the guy that Jon killed at the Skirling Pass, who was the warg, who's left some of his embittered soul in the eagle that keeps on trying to tear Jon's face off.
Right. I'm surprised this eagle didn't show up when Jon was about 600 feet off the ground.
Right, yeah. The eagle comes and chews through the rope. Jon and Yigrette reach the top, utterly exhausted, of course, and they survey both sides of the wall. While putting them on the wall all at the same time definitely added to the TV spectacle and the drama. There does seem to be that the ladders were a much cleverer idea, so bravo to George Martin on that one. And because the whole Horn is abandoned, is not mentioned in the TV show, she's not in tears when she gets there or anything.
Okay. Just tired and scared.
Just tired. All right. Pedantry three corners. Pedantry corner. Okay, so Jon talks about how bright it is, but the thing is, it's not bright if you're at the northern face of a 700-foot wall. Right. In fact, it would always be in shadow.
Okay.
I mean, I'm assuming we're in the northern hemisphere of the world here, so the sun goes to the south, right? It's always in shadow. And then that raised an interesting point to me about the impregnability of the wall from the north. Okay, they're talking about, like, the wall undulates as it goes over hills and valleys and what have you, but also trees pile up against it, and the trees allow you to get higher up on the wall. That's what happened in this chapter. That's not the big issue here, and they talk about the fact that the Night's Watch is diminished. It used to keep the trees back from the wall, but now it doesn't have the staff to do that. That is not the problem. That's not the problem. The problem here is snowdrifts, because you've got this slice of the world which is always in shadow because of that wall. That slice of the world is way north and very cold. Snow would not melt there, and the snow would build up.
Right.
Because there would never be a wind from the south to blow it away. The wind from the north would pack it against the wall.
Yeah.
Wind from the east or west would just roll it along the wall. That snow would never melt, and it would build up, and you'd end up with a slope leading up to quite high on the wall.
Unless you went out there and took care of it.
That's what you have to send the Night's Watch out to do, is dig away that snowdrift constantly, all the time.
Right.
I did a little calculation to find out how deep this shadow would be. So if you used Vancouver as a reference point, let's build a 700-foot wall east to west in Vancouver.
Okay.
There would be more than 300 feet of shadow always north of that wall.
Wow.
Always. Okay. You never see the sun. And at the winter solstice, when the sun is lowest in the sky, it would be 2,000 feet of shadow.
Wow.
Right? And I think Vancouver is a very, very conservative estimate for how far north this is.
Sure.
Because Vancouver is not constantly freezing. We need to go to Anchorage, Alaska. If we go to Anchorage, Alaska, then the permanent shadow would be 600 feet, and the winter solstice shadow would be 2 miles.
Wow. That's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. But I will say, that's using our sun, the shape that the sun makes in our sky.
Okay.
which defines our seasons. This world doesn't have seasons the same way, so I don't know what the sun does. But the sun rises in the east and sets in the west and goes via the south. I think that's true. If that's the case, there is a permanent shadow north of that wall, which would therefore be very cold and therefore susceptible to snowdrifts, and those snowdrifts would never clear themselves.
Yes. Wow. Good work.
Okay. Second one.
Well done. Okay.
Second one.
I like that first one, so let's see where the second one's going.
The second one is, and we've already touched on it, but you huddle together in the Frostfangs because a nameless dread has risen, and the dead stalk the earth. You need to get south of that bloody Great Wall as soon as possible. That wall was built expressly to protect humanity from the White Walkers. Why else build the wall? It wasn't because you wildlings are so fierce and terrifying.
8-foot wall would do for that.
You could build an 8-foot wall. Exactly. If 8 feet is enough to keep the Scots out, then we're not worried about the wildlings. Yeah. But your plan for getting through that wall was to destroy it? That's crazy. That makes no sense.
Yes, right.
I wonder if Mance was going to blow it kind of gently, sort of nibble away at a corner of the wall, you know.
Right. Just make a little pathway.
Exactly.
Just a little toot toot.
Look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to climb up until my iron spikes run out, and then I'm going to blow this horn.
Yes, you make a very good point. All they'd be doing is creating an issue south of the wall for themselves as they have north of the wall.
Exactly. I mean, are they just planning to outrun everyone in the Seven Kingdoms?
I don't have to be faster than the White Walkers. I just have to be faster than the Umbers.
who very quickly will join the army of the White Walkers.
Right.
You can just see the wildlings all sprinting through dawn, sort of like getting rid of their heavy coats. Ooh, it's warm down here.
Those are two really good ones. I like it. I like them both. Well done. Well played. I had one thing. It was just a matter of, it's a lot of rope.
It's a lot of rope.
They carrying with them. I mean, okay, so it's 500 feet from the top of the,
the slope, yeah.
The slope up to the top of the wall. So they've got 500 feet of rope on them. Then they have 5 ladders, each spanning 500 feet. So each side of that ladder is an additional
500 feet. Yeah.
So it's 1,000 feet. And Jon tells us that the rungs on those ladders are as thick as a man's arm. So that's not even, we're at what, 5,500 feet of rope before you start talking about the slats.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you transport that much rope? Possibly they had, there's no mention of them having like a
sled.
Cart. Yeah, so something that they were carrying this significant amount of, that's got to be heavy rope. It's got to hold a lot of people up to 500 feet on this wall. So I just felt like that was a lot of rope to be transporting around.
Yeah. Again, put me in charge of the wildlings. We'd have rope waiting for us.
Right. One little strand that you know where to start pulling
exactly.
from.
I mean, plus that'd be awesome. The problem is, of course, is the bottom of that strand would be buried under a 200-foot high snowdrift.
Right.
It's here somewhere. Why don't the Night's Watch clear this? News and notes.
Well, it turns out that House of the Dragon has already accomplished a feat that Game of Thrones never managed to accomplish. It won the Golden Globe for Best Drama of 2022. Oh. And Martin was so surprised about it that he didn't even bother to fly to LA for the event, because Game of Thrones had been nominated 5 times previously and never won. So he just figured it was an honor to just be nominated again this time, and stayed home, obviously, to work on Winds of Winter. I mean, what else would he be doing? So but they were up against some stiff competition. Ozark and Better Call Saul were in their final seasons, and they were both nominated, as well as a rather new show called Severance, and The Crown, which has already won twice previously. So, but they did send a small faction of representatives, just in the off chance that they won. And Miguel Sapochnik was there, Emma Darcy was there, and Millie Alcock was there to receive the Golden Globe. So
they're both the same character, right?
They are, yes.
Right. Yes.
The Rhaenyra Targaryen.
Rhaenyra, yes, yeah.
So, and from the photos and videos that I saw, they all seemed pretty stunned and unprepared when they got up on that stage. Of course, they could have been acting. It's something that they're probably fairly skilled at, but they seemed like, oh goodness, we didn't expect to win this. So.
The cover of the 2024 Song of Ice and Fire calendar is out. It's beautiful as always. Mackelly has shared it on the social medias.
I have, yeah, it's pretty neat. Although, I will say, I mentioned this on the Discord, it seems to be feels like a little bit of a spoiler of things to come to me.
Oh, but, interesting. I'll check it out.
Maybe I'm wrong. And also, you and I need to get a Buy Me a Coffee Sustainer video call scheduled. So we'll be working on getting that set up. Yeah, we got to do that. And I'm looking forward to doing it. So, we just need to get that on the book, so we will work on that.
Yeah, we will. And I don't know what this one is, so tell me more.
So, Jenny of Oldstones has decided to help me out here with some GOH apparel designs. She's a very talented artist.
She is.
And she's already had some fantastic ideas. The problem is my Photoshop skills do not match the ability needed to flesh out some of the ideas that she has come up with thus far. So I was like, keep reeling it in. And she eventually was like, so we're talking like text in straight lines. And I was like, yes. Text in straight lines I can do.
Well, thank you, Jenny. We appreciate it.
It sure do. Absolutely.
All right, let's conclude. So Jon and Yigrette have scaled the wall. Now what? No stealing horses.
They go down the other side, I guess.
I guess so.
Step one, take a nap and then go down the other side.
Yeah. But it's further evidence to me of the folly of Mormont's ranging. A band of wildlings spent an entire day scaling the most obvious point on the wall possible, and there wasn't a Brother of the Night's Watch to be seen.
Right. Yeah, it kind of goes back to what we talked about early in our discussion, is they maybe didn't need to wipe out all of the useful rangers in the Night's Watch to send them north of the wall. There's just so many reasons why it was a bad idea, and we're seeing exactly why. Yeah.
And I will say that that ladder technology makes me think that the whole Horn of Winter was a waste of time. Why not instead just build a bunch of these ladders and just climb over, en masse? You can defend your position east and west fairly easily, sort of like...
Yeah.
Entrench your position, sort of build a forest of spikes pointing, outwards from your thing and claim a block of wall for yourself.
Yes, right, yeah. You could definitely, you get this group up here, this 16, that'd be enough to build fortifications.
Right, exactly,
to get a mass of people over.
Yeah. And even there are abandoned forts. You could even find one of those and build your east-west around that fort, and then you should have a good way down the southern side as well.
Absolutely.
Castle Black has an elevator, yeah. I don't know if they all have that, but...
they probably have some stairs, which might be in disrepair. But
might be in disrepair, but...
work on that.
Better disrepair stairs than sticking your horned toe into the ice.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good thought.
Yeah.
But then as far as our story goes, Jon finally got some clues toward his spy mission regarding what the wildlings were doing in the Frostfangs.
Right. Somewhat overdue, to be honest. I mean, but the thing is, they failed, or at least Yigrette believes they failed. So
right,
the intel isn't that useful. It's like they gathered together to do something they failed to do. Now they're wandering around in the north aimlessly. They would like to be south of the wall.
Yes, and they know that we've had a huge loss in force.
Right,
so.
Right.
And they're climbing the wall here and there and nobody's paying any attention. That would be probably the more useful bit of information is, hey, send at least 10 rangers in every direction, would you?
Yeah. So where are we headed next week, Mackelly?
Next week, we are going to check in on Jaime Lannister. And
yeah, tell me where he was.
Last we saw, it looked like he might have lost his hand. Well, I can give you some good news. He got to keep it. But maybe not quite in the way he'd like to have.
Uh-oh. Okay.
We'll find out next week.
Well, there's 3 ways that you can help us. You could leave us a review. You could buy merchandise at ghostsofharrenhall.threadless.com, including, very soon, some designed by our own Jenny of Oldstones.
That's right.
You could buy us a cup of Arbor Gold at buymeacoffee.com/ghostsharrenhall, become a sustainer at the Lord Paramount or Knight of the Realm level, and get the benefits that are associated with those levels.
That's right. Of course, people also got one of those benefits this week, so I hope you enjoyed that.
Teaser.
That's right. And of course, you could always go out and reach us at ghost.harrenhall@gmail.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at @ghostharrenhall. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Discord, and YouTube.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.